Welcome to Riverbend Talent on WBGZ, brought to you by the Halpin Music Company.
Riverbend Talent on the Big Z. I'm Dennis, Pigpen along, brought to you by the Halpin Music Company and by Mr. Matt Van Voorst of Macias Insurance. And man, we're nailing them during this quarantine. We're finally catching up with some of these really busy guys. Pigpen, who do we got tonight?
Tonight we got an old friend, Blake Fleming. How's it going, Blake?
Hey, great to be here.
Blake is a local guy, played in a lot of bands back in the day, an amazing drummer who left us back in the mid-'90s and headed east. He flew east, and he has been up to a whole lot since he left town. So we're going to talk to him about some of the old times in Alton, and then what he's been doing out in New York, and then finally we're going to discuss his book, which I have right here. Blake Fleming. It is the Book of Rhythms, BOR, the Book of Rhythms. Over 5,000 rhythms that he has compiled that are sort of laid out in a drumming fashion, but of course the rhythms, you can use them for any instrument. You can use these rhythms on anything you want, and we can get into all of that because we're going to work up to that. Let's rewind back to some old Alton days.
All right. So you got started back when you were 8 years old, right?
That's right. Yeah. I started playing the snare drum when I was 8. I was lucky. I had a neighbor that was a drummer, and she kind of talked me into taking some lessons. She was like, "You should take some drum lessons." As an 8-year-old kid, I hadn't really thought about it much, except for doing typical things that kids do, beating on pots and pans and these old ice cream tubs my mom would get sometimes. I would play on those. You remember those, right? And
I do.
Yeah. Oh, they made great drums. But yeah, so at 8 years old, via a neighbor, Sarah Greer, I started learning the snare drum, and that was an immediate gateway to the Alton Fife and Drum Corps, because Sarah was part of that, and
So Pigpen, right off the bat, he gets in one of the biggest bands in town. The Colonial Fife and Drum Corps. For real, they were in all the parades.
Yeah.
And at that point, back in those days, the Corps was pretty large. There was, I don't know, 30 or 40 of us, something like that, at least 30 of us. It was a good-sized band, and, there was something about, I guess, just the power of maybe drums and the power of rock and roll, but the power of music in general that I felt at an early age, and being in the Fife and Drum Corps, and we had say 6 snare drummers across, and 3 bass drummers, and then a legion of fifers in front of us in the color guard. But the impact, the literal air pressure being moved from the presence of the drums, that's one of the reasons I still love it to this day. Is there's just something it's like an alchemical force or something. It's I don't know. But it struck me at a really young age, and so I was just super lucky that my neighbor suggested, we should take some drum lessons, because like I said, I'd never really thought about it in a structured manner. It was just something that I enjoyed on an emotional, visceral, physical level or something,
That was Jerry Whitaker, right? And he was a snare drum champ, right? Rudimental snare drum champ.
Jerry Whitaker came into the Corps maybe a couple years after I had started the snare drum, and he became the drum major for the Corps. And so I had this guy. He was a rudimental champion from West Point. Which for rudimental drumming is like the pinnacle of stuff. If you just move to our area, so I'm this little kid, and I've got this guy. And not only did I have him, but I had Sarah, who was an amazing teacher who really gave me this foundation that I was able to build on. I had really good hands from the get-go, not because of necessarily something built into me, but because I had really good instruction, And then I kind of know what I'm starting to do a little bit, and then I get this guy from West Point that comes in and really kicks it into high gear and starts refining everything. And I learned a lot of discipline and a lot of about work and just having a work ethic from those days, and I also learned how to have a really good time at a really young age. So I got kind of in trouble there a little bit. And I remember my mom and dad pulled me out of the Corps when I was about 12 because we'd all had a little too much fun on a trip to Washington D.C. at one point, so, and then some people found out about it, so.
Well, I guess it wasn't too long after that, though, that you started Dazzling Killmen, right? About 15.
Yeah, I mean, I think whenever I met Darren Gray, I think I was about 15 years old. I had gotten invited by Tim Jardin, who was the high school jazz band director, and just someone I absolutely adored and loved and looked up to, and he was just so tremendous to me.
Still is a tremendous guy.
I love that dude, man. I haven't seen him forever. I have not seen him forever, and I would really, really love to see him at some point. He
retired, and his son took his place.
Yeah.
Oh wow! I mean, one of those.
There's an episode of Riverbend Talent we did with him from his retirement.
Yeah, that's right.
He was one of those people that even though I was so much younger and had so much to learn from him, he always talked to you like an equal, and that's something, man, that I continue to do to this day to people in general, and especially my students. Is I just look at them as people. I don't really get off. I mean, I teach at a college too. I could totally get off in the hierarchy of like I am this professor and blah blah. I don't believe in that. I don't buy it. We're all people. I may have some more information that you don't have, and you want that information from me, but that's my job to give that to you. But you have things that you know about that I know nothing about, and I know that, So for me to presume that I'm on some other higher level because of this certain knowledge that I hold, I think is sort of foolish, So Tim was always like that. He was so cool, man. He would, I would stay after rehearsal with him, and we would just hang out for a while, and we would talk like dudes, and he would be real with me, and I really appreciated and respected that, and it had a huge influence on me, absolutely, So yeah, so after the 5 drum corps, I kind of progressed through all the school bands and all that, and in between the 5 and drum corps and Dazzling Killmen, I had a little stint in the John Ford Highlanders, this bagpipe band based out of St. Louis. We were sponsored by the VFW, and the ironic thing about that is like if I got pulled out of the 5 and drum corps for having too much fun, they then stuck me in a band with a bunch of alcoholic World War II vets from Ireland and Scotland. I kid you not, So I mean, like, we played in the Orange Bowl, right? We played the Orange Bowl parade one year, and we had a 24-hour bus ride from St. Louis to Miami, and there was a keg of beer on the bus for that bus ride. That part of the ride we got to be sleeping for, right? So it's like a keg of beer. Maybe it's a half keg. It was a huge amount of beer. So that was pretty funny. I was like 14 years old, and definitely did some traveling with those guys. Had some experiences. It wasn't always like partying. I don't make it out to be more than it was. That was a big part of it. But that was musically, all these bands were so important to, I guess, the development of what became, my style, my sound, whatever you might want to call it. Because it was the rhythms in rudimental fife and drum corps music or Scottish bagpipe band music are really interesting. And the Scottish music has a certain swing to it. The fife and drum corps music in the rhythm parts has a certain syncopation to it sometimes. And that kind of really helped inform my drumming. Kind of a mixture of growing up playing with tapes and records and listening to the Ramones and the Clash and the Sex Pistols and playing to that stuff. That's where I kind of really cut my teeth. And then I had this sort of marching background too, and so I mixed all that up and kind of put it into a stew, and eventually began to find my own personality in that, So Tim Jordan, going back to that, invited me to play in the Lewis and Clark Jazz Band, I think I was 15, and so I started going to rehearsals there on like Monday night or whatever it was. And at some point, Darren started playing bass there. He started attending the college there, and we just started getting together outside of rehearsals, basically, to play, and found that very quickly we had a lot in common musically. Even though, you know, he was, I think, maybe 6 years older than me, 5 or 6. Which, you know, when you're like 16 and someone's 21, or you're 15 and someone's 20 or 21, it's kind of a big age difference, because that person is starting to be kind of an adult, quote unquote, and the 15-year-old is, you're still very much a little kid in a lot of ways, you know. But we were on common ground musically, you know. So it was interesting, but yeah, I think I was 15, 16 years old when Dazzling Killmen started. So, you know, it was incredibly formative for me. And, you know, people kind of look back at the face that Sean's making right now of, like, you were 15 or 16 in that band. People that know that band was pretty demanding, and, you know, the music was not easy. And, yeah, I was a kid, you know, and now that, you know, my college kids seem like babies to me, let alone a 15 or 16-year-old. I'm like, oh, my God, no wonder my parents were horrified. You know, like, no wonder they were graying and balding, you know, like, so quickly. I mean, I you know, some of my adventures, I imagine, put them through a lot, but it was an incredible experience. I mean, absolutely priceless. I mean, that was some of the greatest schooling that I had ever gone to was the school of Dazzling Killmen. You know, for better or for worse, you know, it depends. Sometimes it works out for the better, sometimes it doesn't. But you know, it's something I would never exchange for anything. You know, that was very, very formative. So yeah, I was really young. You know, so coming from a basic kind of band nerd sort of background. You know, I was in every band I could be in, like school wise or community wise. You know, I was in the Alton Uni band. You know, I used to play in the Alton Uni band. Haskell Park and Riverview Park, you know, because like when I was, I don't know when I started in it, maybe I was 14 years old or something. It was like at the end of the summer I'd have a check for like $300 or $400, you know. When you're like 13 or 14, that's like, wow, man, that's cool. I could buy a drum set or like some drum cases or something, and that's usually where it went, you know, and just more equipment. But I came up as just a person who loved music and was, you know, I've never been very genre specific at all. I just like anything that I like, period. You know, as long as there's some sort of integrity to it or some sincerity or something, or just whatever. Just as long as I can, as long as it hits me in some sort of way, it doesn't matter what it is, you know.
A lot of cool bands come out of our area during that time, though, with the Dazzling Killmen and then Uncle Tupelo. Around that time, you guys played with those guys a lot, and that's some early experience there that you probably took with you the rest of your life.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, again, you know, I couldn't have been any older than, I was 16 or 17, at the oldest 17, when I met Jeff Tweedy for the first time, you know, because Darren and Nick from the Killmen were friends with Jay and Jeff and Mike Hydorn. And, you know, they were living above this, I think it was like a dance studio or something in Belleville when those guys were still kind of getting started. And they were all living together at that point. And we had gone over there a couple times, you know, and just hung out and would, like, drink beer. And, like, you know, they'd play me all kinds of records. Because, again, you know, I was the kid, you know, and I was like this sponge kid that would soak up all this stuff. And they would just, you know, here, have a beer, and here's, you know, check this out, you know, you ever heard this band? I'd be like, no, you know, play it for me. So, but yeah, you know, that was, and in Alton, you know, we also had, you know, Club Zero and then Judge Nothing, and we had like the Bishops and, you know, the Undecided. There was so many groups, and then, you know, Autumn Clock, and I mean, I'm gonna forget half.
Stubblefield.
Yeah, exactly, Stubblefield. I mean, you know, and part of that was too, like I said, Alton was in a certain time period, you know, was really experiencing like urban decay, like in the downtown area and along Broadway, and so there was always these empty buildings that, you know, you could find out who the landlord was. And, you know, I remember I had this huge loft, the one on the corner of State and what was it? It was Third.
Yeah.
Right there, State.
Yep.
Third. it was like $100 a month, you know, and it was gigantic, you know, and you know, I was still technically living at my parents', but I mean, I basically lived there all the time and just went home to eat and shower. You know, I was a college kid, and like, it was great. It was $100 a month, so you know, at that point, after Dazzling Killmen had broken up, I made a living from teaching drum lessons in Alton, and I had my loft space. So all I did was like live down there. People would come by for drum lessons. People would come by to jam, and I would just educate myself so much because a lot of my friends had moved away. They had gone away to college, and I stayed in the area for Dazzling Killmen, you know, because that band had started when I was in high school, and I didn't want anything to jeopardize that. So I ended up, you know, going to SIU, and you know, they had a pretty good jazz program there anyway, so that worked out well. And yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought.
Yeah. So you guys, Dazzling Killmen, put out some albums, and so you got some experience recording for the first time. And Face of Collapse got some great reviews around the country. How'd that feel?
Yeah, I mean, you know, at the time, you know, Dazzling Killmen, we always felt like we kind of existed in a bit of a vacuum. You know, that not a whole lot of people knew about us. The people that did know about us were either loved or hated, you know, and the people that loved were pretty rabid about it. But other than that, you know, we didn't have a whole lot of peers, at least especially in the St. Louis area, you know. There was still a lot of like kind of hair bands down on the Landing. There was also, you know, Uncle Tupelo and the whole, you know, kind of mixing of like punk and country and stuff. That was starting to become more popular with bands. You had like the Three Merry Widows and, you know, the Urge, you know, the kind of punk, funk, and ska. You know, all that kind of stuff was going on. And Dazzling Killmen did not fit into any of that. You know, we were like a bummer compared to that. Like, people wanted to have a party, and people could party to us, but there were only very special kind of people that were on the wavelength that got it, you know. And so, you know, we sort of, I guess, enjoyed some of the reviews that we did get, but I think that at the time that we were a band, a lot of that stuff was so absent that we didn't really attach much to it to begin with. It was like, it didn't have any bearing on our existence anyway. We were going to keep doing what we were going to do no matter what. You know, so it wasn't something that we could, like, now, 25 or whatever it is, how many ever years later, we can sit back and enjoy it. We've gotten a lot more recognition. A lot more people know about the band. A lot more people understand that the band was important, that the band was influential. At the time, you know, it just seemed probably, you know, aggressive and noisy to a lot of people. But it stood the test of time, actually. You know, Face of Collapse just went through a really, really beautiful deluxe remaster reissue. It came out as a gatefold package, double album with 3 sides. The 4th side is an etching. If there's a booklet, Ingraft Records, who, you know, the Killmen had been with since some pretty early days, reissued that. And I highly recommend, not just because it's my band or my old band, but if anyone is a fan of that band, they should definitely pick up that reissue because it is an absolutely incredible package. There's some great liner notes included, and the remaster job that me and a friend of mine had done a couple years ago, I think just helped it shine or pop or something just a little bit more. It was maybe just a hair murky in the past, but the review is great. It's beautiful, and you know, so now we can kind of sit back and enjoy some of those reviews or, you know, people kind of catching up to us a little bit. That does feel good. I mean, anytime that you are an artist and put yourself out there, you better not be doing it just to get the praise, because you're definitely not going to last long, and you're not going to make very good art, and you have no business being there anyway. Then if that's your goal, right?
Yeah, I think that's what your fans appreciate about Dazzling Killmen, though, is that's the route you took, and that's what fans embrace, right? So that paid off for you there, and man, I love it, Dazzling Killmen. And so what happened to the band?
Like all bands, they eventually break up. There's only a certain shelf life for most of them, and it was just typical band tension and friction, and personalities and things that develop over time. But same thing happened to Dia Blanco, and a very similar thing happened in the way that the band broke up, as it was really, I guess, which is the best way to go out if you're going to go out. You don't want to go out on the downward slope. We were definitely on the trajectory was upward, for both of those bands. Dazzling Killmen broke up 2 weeks before we were going to Japan to go on tour. That was tough, because I still never been to Japan, and all the stuff I've done, I've never been in Japan yet to play.
You played with a Japanese prog punk band, though, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Zina Geba, I think. Is that how you say it? Yeah. Yeah. So what was that like?
They were friends of ours, from the Dazzling Killmen days. They, on, I think, their very first tour of the U.S., they had done at least one show with us, if not a few shows. I remember one in Madison, Wisconsin. It was this crazy place called OK's Corral we used to play that is just kind of legendary, because it would just, there was just no, it was like the old Wild West, you know what I mean? There was just no law. And people got pretty wild there. But, those guys had come over from Japan. They had a record out on this little label called, actually I don't remember the name of the label now, but I think it was their first tour, and we ended up becoming friends, and immediately kind of hooked up as kindred spirits, and really appreciated each other's bands, each other's music. So fast forward a few years down the road, it's, I think, 1996, and Zina Geva is on Alternative Tentacles, which is Jello Biafra's label, Jello Biafra from the Dead Kennedys, his label out of San Francisco. So they had this record coming out that had some pretty decent distribution, and they lost their drummer in Japan. They parted ways. So they called me and wanted to know if I wanted to do this U.S. tour with them, and it was perfect, because that kind of gave me, I didn't get paid a ton of money for it, but it gave me a little chunk that I needed to get my butt to New York City.
Right.
And I did that. We toured the U.S. for 2 months, which was just amazing. It was great. I loved those guys. I still love those guys as people and as musicians. And the band that opened up for us, this band called Today Is the Day, who's still going and has grown more and more in popularity. We were using their back line, so we were traveling in like this kind of like more like a sporty sort of car. It was like a Chrysler or something, which was kind of sporty at the time. This is 1996, But I remember, it just felt so luxurious, because everything, I had not been in a band yet where everything was set up for you and you had a roadie and all that kind of stuff. But since we were using backline, you just showed up to the gig and everything was on stage and it was all ready to go, So it felt pretty luxurious. And I was getting paid a salary on top of it, which was like, you're not sure if you're going to make any. Most of the time, you're going to lose money, right? Most bands, right? If you're going to go on the road, unless you're lucky or unless you got something really going on, you're going to take a hit at some point, at least the first time. But we had a deal worked out, and we had a pretty decent booking agency. Zina Geva was pretty popular in the U.S. as far as playing like good sized alternative sort of venues, punk rock clubs, and that kind of thing, and. We'd play like in Austin, Texas, and there'd be like 500 or 600 people there or something. Those are like amazing shows, because there's they're huge, but they're still intimate, you know, and like the audience can be right there in your face, you know. I love that. But that was a great experience, and like I said, that gave me the last bit of cash I needed to move to New York City, and
that's when Ladio Blanco started, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
And that kind of put you as a drummer on the map. People started recognizing who Blake Fleming was, right? That with those instrumental band there.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I between doing all the touring the Dazzling Killmen had done, and then Zinni Geva, when Dia Blanco did our first tour, we did a 2-month U.S. tour that I booked myself, and I booked it. This is pre-internet, you know. This was 1997. It was 97 or 98 when we did that first tour. I think it was 97. We went out for 2 months, coast to coast, and did not lose our butts on that. And that was partly because I was able to book a pretty decent tour based on what I had done in Dazzling Killmen and in Zinni Geva at that point. Because that's all I had at that point was you know. And so people had respect for those bands, which was great. And then I guess Dia Blanco, I kind of helped for me to get some recognition kind of more individually, I guess, maybe. You know, the band was pretty rhythmically intense, and eventually went on to, you know, influence the formation of the Mars Volta as well, and then countless other bands that, well, I don't want to say countless, but apparently from what people say, Dia Blanco influenced a lot of bands. But
that,
you know,
that name sounds familiar.
Oh, that's right. For those in our listening area, I had a band in the late '90s called Dia Blanco that was pronounced exactly like Ladio from Alton, from Ladio's restaurant, but I just took it and spelled the name differently. Dia Blanco, the band, is Laddio, Ladio, and then Bolocko, Bolocko, Ladio Blanco. You know, it's hard coming up with a band name, and it's hard coming up with a good band name, and I thought that one was just perfect, and I knew that no one was going to have that, you know. It's going to be able to set us apart from the get-go. So I was very happy about that. Yeah. We even have a song called "In Search of Ladio." You know,
I spent many a nights drinking at Ladio's bar, eating at Ladio's restaurant. Yeah. So a really hell of a nice guy, and what a great name for a band, because it is hard to come up with a name for a band.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to Ladio's when it was off of that side street off of Broadway, kind of on the hill there. I mean, I was a kid. It was like for my brother's, like, maybe it was like his 16th birthday or something, so I would have been like 8 years old, you know. And then I worked for Sam Blanco out at when Ladio's moved to Humbert, which eventually became
it's a carpet store now.
Is that what it is? Okay, yeah.
It's a carpet store now, but used to, for years, Ladio had a happening joint down there, man. That was a cool place.
Yeah.
And a nice guy.
At some point, somebody went into Sam's pawn shop. It might have been maybe one of my brothers or an uncle. I can't remember who it was now, but somebody alerted Sam, and then I believe, because Ladio was hanging out at the pawn shop one day, and somebody told him, you know, and he was getting up there in years, you know, and he said something sort of like, well, you don't say. It was pretty awesome. It was just like you know, like he wasn't offended. He was kind of into it, you know. I think he was flattered a little bit, but then he just forgot about it pretty immediately. Also, he's like, yeah, I'm moving on now, you know. So.
Yeah, I've had other bands named after me. No big deal. No. Yeah, he's a good guy, great place, man. That's a cool name too. And in the days of Google, it's even harder to name a band, because when you check it on Google, you don't just know the local band names. Now you know all the, it's hard to find a band that ain't out there, the band name that had been used. So
yeah, the band that became La Dia Blanco, like what we were talking about earlier, before we started recording the interview, that band started as a trio in Alton, with me and Ben Armstrong and Drew St. Ivany, both from the Edwardsville area, and we used to practice in a practice base right across from the old Civil War wall there. What street is that?
It's Lee. I can't remember. It's one up from where State comes. It's the very last road that hits the river road before there is no more heading down there. And that little you gave some drum lessons down there. You got your band practice down there, and you were giving some private drum lessons down there, and it could also be used as a party space sometimes late nights when the bars were closing.
Multi-use for sure.
I remember that place, man.
I'll tell you what, we need to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll pick it up with the Mars Volta, your short little stay there, and get into what you've been doing, including the book up next here on Riverbend Talent. Brought to you by the Halpa Music Company and by Mr. Matt Van Voris of Macias Insurance. Back with Blake Fleming after this. More Riverbend Talent on the Big Z. Dennis here, Pigpen as well, and brought to you by Halpa Music Company and by Mr. Matt Van Voris of Macias Insurance. And we're talking to Blake Fleming, and he's with the Dazzling Killmen, and we had just left off about the time you were headed to L.A. to do the Mars Volta thing. That's a kind of a strange story. There's like two different bands involved that form one band, and I got kind of lost in that story. But you ended up playing drums on the demo, right? That ended up, I guess, getting them kind of going.
Yeah. On the last La Dia Blanco tour, which we did like a month-long tour around the U.S. with that band Trans Am. We had a 2-night run in Los Angeles, and Omar and Cedric, like the two main guys who were from the band at the drive-in at the time, had come to see us. Actually, they had come to see Trans Am. They didn't know who we were, and they were really taken by surprise. And I was like, holy crap, who is this band or whatever? And we ended up staying with those guys for the couple nights that we were in the LA area, and we were they were riding back in our van, and the show was in LA, and they had this big warehouse space that I eventually ended up living in out in Long Beach. And so we drove out to Long Beach, and on the way out to Long Beach, we were just talking and sharing band stories and that kind of stuff. And Omar and Cedric are they start talking about band stories, and they're talking about, on this last show we did with Rage Against the Machine, and then like when we were opening for U2, and we're like, wait, what? For a minute we thought they were just totally like BSing us, right? And I was like, wait, who are you guys? And I think they were kind of surprised because they were starting to be very, very well known at that point, and we didn't know who they were. We didn't really keep up with anything resembling mainstream at all at that point. I was really had my head in another place, and they said, well, we're in this band called At the Drive-In. And we all had these like blank looks in the van. We're like, who's that? And like, that's our band. And I was like, are you guys, you really like playing with U2 and Raging? They're like, yeah, like we've got this new record out. And so literally after that day, we saw them everywhere. Like every town we go into, they're on the front of like the weekly magazine, like the Riverfront Times, equivalent of every town in America. Right. Those guys were on the front. I was like, oh, those are those dudes we stayed with. And it was like, like they weren't kidding. They weren't, it was kind of bizarre actually. And so that's how we met. And they were really into La Dia Blanco. And La Dia Blanco, like I said, was an instrumental band. And after that tour, a couple months later, La Dia Blanco ended up breaking up. And so I called those guys out in Long Beach and to let them know that, hey, I'm kind of a free agent. I'm not playing with anybody right now. I was living in New York City at the time. I'd moved out to New York in 1996, and this would have been, I think I called them maybe January of like 2001 or something. And they were on this tour at the time in Europe with one of their side project bands. So I talked to their roommate, this guy Jeremy Ward, who eventually ended up in the Mars Volta as well, and was the first casualty of the band, actually. That the band has had a couple people die, and now we've got a guy in a coma, and Jeremy was the first one, unfortunately. But so he answered the phone and was like, hey, I'll give these guys your message. And so they had called him from Europe and got the message, like a couple days later. So they called me from Europe and was like, hey, we're in Germany. We're getting ready to come back home, but like, hey, we're going to break up at the drive-in if you want. You want to start this band with us? Like, you want to do like a band like Dia Blanco, but with vocals, like Cedric sings. It would be like a, like an instrument, like a Ladio band with vocals, basically. And I was like, well, yeah, that sounds amazing, because I knew that, like, those guys were on Grand Royal, the Beastie Boys label. They had, some of the biggest managers in the business at that point, John Silva and Gary Gersh, who were also like Nirvana's managers, the Beastie Boys managers. They were fully a part of the machine, right, of the industry. And at that point, I was like, that was appealing to me, not as much anymore, but at that point, I was in my 20s still, and so I was like, yeah, let's do it. And so we started just kind of exchanging ideas back and forth, and like 2 weeks later, they sent me a plane ticket to fly out to LA. And so for about 6-7 months, I lived on both coasts. I did the band full time, so I didn't have to have a job or worry about anything like that. So I'd go out to the LA, Long Beach area for 2 to 3 weeks at a time. We would rehearse a bunch, work on a bunch of different things. We would record and do all kinds of stuff, and then I'd go back to New York City for anywhere from like a week or two, just to kind of go back home, take care of some stuff up there. But it was amazing, because when I was in New York City, I didn't have anything. I was like, the city was my oyster at that point. I was making a living playing drums all of a sudden, and I was like, when I was back in New York City, I just had free time, to hang out and do stuff. And I was like, oh my God, I'm living the dream, And that went on from, let's say, I think March of 2001 until August, the end of August of 2001. When I left the band, I came back to New York City, and it was like a week later 9/11 happened or something like that. It was maybe 2 weeks later. I think it was the very end of August when I left. And then September 11th happened, it was less than 2 weeks later. And I lived right on the river across from the World Trade Center. I was the last street in Brooklyn, Columbia Street, before you hit the river. There was like loading docks and stuff, in front of my apartment. So you had like stadium view seating of the towers and stuff. And my neighborhood is the neighborhood that got covered in all the debris and ashes that day from it. It was insane, to say the least. But yeah, that was like the Mars Volta. My stint with them, my first stint with them, ended, and then, like I said, I think it was less than 2 weeks later. All of a sudden, 9/11 happened, and then that reality existed for a while. Yeah, that was intense. But yeah, I met those guys through touring with Dia Blanco and Trans Am. On one of those shows we did in Los Angeles, we were playing at this place called Spaceland, where I met Omar and Cedric. We also had Jack Black come to one of our gigs, except I didn't know who he was. I knew. I don't know if I actually knew who. I knew who he was, but I didn't know who he was that night. I was like, who was that kind of fat dude laying on the stage? He got up and laid on the stage while we played, and just like, and I was like, oh, that was Jack Black. I'm like, what? Get out of here! No way! Yeah, I never did talk to him. He never came up to us or anything after that. But apparently, he enjoyed the band. But yeah, that's essentially how the Mars Volta started. Those guys really, really were super into Dia Blanco. They thought Dia Blanco was kind of looking towards the future a bit more, and they thought what they were doing at the drive-in, it made them feel like, to put it in their words, they said it's like we feel like dinosaurs. Like they felt like it was like old and rehashed, even though they were a great band, and they were they had a lot of fans, and you know, were starting to have a really huge amount of success. They were kind of slated to be the next Nirvana, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And those guys walked away from a really big paycheck. And I totally respected them for that, to do something more adventurous, more artistic, you know. And so, again, Mars Volta was essentially, let's do like Ladia Blanco, but with vocals, you know, and then it progressed from there. So,
Nice. You would come back to do the Red Hot Chili Peppers tour, though. That had to be fun.
Yeah. So, you know, I left in 2001. They eventually get John Theodore to come in, replaces me. John is with the band for about 5 years. Doesn't just slays it, kills it, does an amazing job. I love his playing on that stuff. And you know, with that band, the drummers essentially start to get recognition because the music is so difficult. It's really difficult music to play because not only is it just technically difficult, but it has to be played at an insanely brutal volume all the time, which takes so much more muscle energy. And it's really hard to. It's very easy to articulate some things at a much more relaxed volume. But if you've got to articulate something crazy, but also beat the heck out of your instrument, it's a lot more difficult. So, what was it? Oh, yeah, that was one of the reasons why John ended up either getting fired or leaving. You know, who knows what the real story is? Because the drummers start to get a lot of attention to that band because of the difficulty of the music. And there can only be so many cooks in the kitchen, and there's already kind of two lead guys. There's a lead singer, but there's also the lead guitar player. The lead guitar player kind of writes most things, you know, writes all the music. The singer writes all the lyrics, but the guitar player is also kind of more the head of the band, even though the singer's kind of the front man. And so there's that dynamic there, right? Which can, even with those guys being age-old friends, could still be, you know, stressful at times.
So you're in New York around that time. You start doing a lot of session work. I guess that's you know, bands get to be tough sometimes. So you decide, hey, I'm just gonna kind of do session work.
Yeah, you know, it at that point in the band, there was a lot of heavy drug use, and it was just not my scene, man. You know, like needles and stuff. You know, shooting various things. You know, being up for days and days and days at a time. That kind of stuff, right? And so it just started to become pretty dysfunctional in a lot of ways early on, and I just was pretty uncomfortable with how a lot of things were going down. So I split, man, because it was like, you know, getting paid was never the first reason I started playing music, ever, you know. So it was a bummer to walk away from that and kind of start back again on my own in New York City, but I had to get back to where I was enjoying what I was doing musically and not being completely stressed out by the band dynamic and the environment. It got to be a pretty toxic situation for a while. And like I said, you know, Jeremy Ward, who answered that initial phone call when I called out there, you know, very sadly, maybe a year and a half later, basically dies with a needle in his arm. 27 years old, you know. So there was a pretty dark scene happening out there for a while, you know. So I split, man, because like I said, I can hang, man. I've been through a lot of stuff. I can hang with a lot of people in a lot of scenes and all that. And you know, if things happen on an occasion or a night or whatever, you know, it's like, yeah, it is part of the business, you know, in a lot of ways. You know, whether you're the lawyer or the band or it doesn't matter. It's pervasive, right? But then it crosses some lines, and it was not my scene after a while, you know. So I split, and about 5 years goes by, and Omar calls me out of the blue, and we started this conversation again. And he's living in Amsterdam. He flies Amsterdam or Rotterdam. I can't remember actually. It was the Netherlands. He's flying back to El Paso. He makes a stop off of my place in Brooklyn. We spend 12 hours talking and negotiating from 7 p.m. till 7 a.m. And when he left, I was back in the band. They were going to get rid of John Theodore, and we were going to go on tour with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and I needed to start picking out a drum set. Okay. It all was pretty great for a while, and the difficulties that were there with some of the substance abuse and stuff, that wasn't there any longer, luckily. But the ability, the desire to want to control every part of someone's life and a bit of megalomaniacal sort of behavior had taken the substance abuse's place. And it's a very uncomfortable situation for me because I'm a very, very upfront, let's get it all out in the open sort of person. I don't have skeletons in my closet. I don't do that. I don't have time to deal with that kind of stuff. So if I have something to say to someone, I say it. And I try to be democratic or tactful or whatever it is about it, sensitive, but I still say whatever I have to say. And so we had negotiated for 12 hours, like I said, about how things were going to be. And once I had gotten into it, and there was a pretty big carrot being dangled in front of me, I was making, a good amount of money all of a sudden for just playing the drums. Some things that we negotiated, that we talked about, were just kind of slipping by all of a sudden. Weren't really, without going into too much detail. And so, after a while, it was very ironic because I had gotten to the top. I was literally had walked out of the LA Forum and literally had 300 or 400 people screaming my name and was signing people's bodies and shirts and all kinds of stuff, because I was the original drummer, but I also had like big shoes to fill, coming in replacing John Theodore, and so there was a lot of excitement about whether I could do it or not, kind of thing. And will the original guy, he was the original architect, but will he be good enough to come in 5 years later? And if I was, well, then they cheered, and if I wasn't, they would rip me apart on the internet, which they did all of that anyway, because they're going to do that anyway. The moment you put yourself out there enough, people are going to love and hate you, period. There's always going to be some haters. And so, but I mean, I got to the point where I'm literally walking out with my wife and an old friend of mine from Edwardsville. We're in LA at the Forum, and I walking towards the bus, and there's literally, and no exaggeration, there's 300 or 400 people like, play, blah. And I'm like, oh my God, like, I made it. Like, I mean, dude, look, what more can, I'm making all this money, I've got endorsements, like, what, okay, I made it. That progressively turned into one of the worst experiences of my life because the dynamic in the band got so bad and so toxic that it was so, touring is very difficult already, and when you're friends with the people, it can still be difficult. When you're not, after a while, it's one of the loneliest situations that you can be in. And when you play arenas, it sounds really great and thrilling to your friends, but the reality of it is that you're totally disconnected from everyone. Like, you're super far away from the audience. It's not like you're playing at a bar and then all of a sudden you go hang with the people that just adored you, and you're having a beer at the bar and rubbing elbows with them. No, there's barriers between everything. You're very disconnected. So, and then, most arenas are not like in the middle of a downtown. They're like outside of, it's not like St. Louis. A lot of places that have arenas are outside. It's like an industrial park. So then there's nowhere to go. So then you're stuck on the bus, or you're stuck in like a basketball or hockey dressing room, essentially is where the bands are, because they're all sports arenas, that we were playing with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And so on paper, it all looks great, but the reality of a situation like that can be sort of off-putting for the individual involved sometimes, and that was really ironic because it's like your dream to get to that point, but when you get to that point and all of a sudden it's not how you may have imagined it to be, and then you're just kind of dreaming about getting back in the van and making $50 again with your buddies, it's like, there's something wrong with that,
Yeah.
It's like $2,000 a week to play the drums is pretty good cash, man, and that was back in those days,
Right.
So I walked away from a lot, man, because again, I've never, that's the one thing I can say about my career in general, is like, I do some things that I'm not in love with in the studio because I'm faceless there and I get paid to do a service and I'll play on people's records that I may not necessarily love sometimes. But to do something live or to go on tour or something especially, there's got to be a full commitment there for me. that I really am into this, you know. And it got to the point where everything on the surface was how you would want it to be, but the reality underneath it was not one of the more fun times. It was educational, and it definitely got me to a point where I could go back to New York City, and I just was able to play drums. Then, from then on, you know, I did tons of studio work, and I started just playing gigs all over town with people, and teaching drum lessons.
Got back to teaching, right? Yeah, you enjoy that, obviously, because you wrote a book about it, the Book of Rhythm.
Yeah. You know, I've taught. I've taught since I was like 14 or 15 years old. You know, privately, because I mean, I like to teach, and it was like I can make way more money teaching private lessons than I can going to work at a restaurant job or some other job that was available to me as like a high school or college kid. You know. And it took a little time to build up like a studio of students, but once I did, you know, I mean, I could make $300 or $400 a week living in Alton, being like 18 years old or something. That was a lot of money, you know, and that was from, you know, giving drum lessons. I mean, maybe it wasn't I'm probably, you know, padding that a little bit, maybe like $150 or $200, but $150, $200 when you're 18 years old back in the early 90s is good bread if you're doing something you enjoy, you know. So teaching has always been a bit of a buffer between me having to do things that I don't want to do, you know, musically, meaning, you know. So if I don't take any gig that comes along. I never did, because I never started out that way. I started off as a band kid, like a kid in a band. Like Dazzling Killmen was my first real band. That was my first experience, and that's what you did. I didn't play with anybody else. I just played with the guys in my band. I didn't even, you know, it wasn't like, I'm available to play with anybody. I was like, no, I didn't want to play with anybody. I was like, this is my art project right now, and that's what I'm doing, you know. And I've kind of always been that way. I've always approached it that way, and I think it's allowed me to have a pretty good discography of some interesting things, you know, and some things that, you know, have some integrity to them, and that, you know, I don't know, you know.
So we got just a couple minutes left. Tell us about the book. What got you to writing the Book of Rhythm?
Yeah, so I had wanted to write a book for a long time. It was really difficult for me because every time I would start, it would just become overwhelming, and then I would end up bailing on the idea, you know. I should say, too, that you can find out more information about me and my book and a bunch of stuff at blakethedrummer.com. That's my website. And I have a brand new website that's getting ready to launch in about a week. I have a brand new all drum EP that's getting ready to come out as well. And I have a new rhythm project as well. So I've got a number of things in the works. I've been collaborating with some other people too. But the Book of Rhythm is essentially the biggest archive of rhythms in existence ever. And it starts with what you can do if you've got 3 beats, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to if you have 12, right? And 12 beats could be thought of 12/8 or like a 4/4 measure of triplets, you know, 1 end of 2 end of 3 end of 4 end of, so it goes all the way up to 12. And like I said before, I started off kind of writing my own method book, which I may do eventually one of these days, but then I started discovering more universal information, and then I was like, oh man, I think I got to pursue this and kind of make this encyclopedia of rhythm. And you know, so I would sit down with a notebook. I wrote the whole thing out in two notebooks, and it, you know,
he's actually pulling the notebook out, folks.
It started looking like, you know, just pages and pages. And it just goes on, you know, pages of these. I did it all by hand, and what I started doing was like, okay, let's say I've got four spaces to work with, 4 notes, rest, I got 4 spaces. What are all the things that I can do with those 4 spaces? Well, let's occupy 1 space first, okay? So play on 1, then play on 2, then play on 3, then play on 4. Then I was like, oh, okay, well, let's do 2 of them now. Now play on 1 and 2. And then, now I had to figure out, how am I going to start to cycle these, though? So do I split 1 and 2 into 1 and 3? Like beat 1, beat 3, and have this gap? Or do I move beats 1 and 2 and then have the rhythm go to beats 2 and 3? Anyway, this is kind of I'm trying to make a difficult synopsis in just a couple minutes.
Buy the book, Book of Rhythm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me tell you what I know. Let me tell you, as a guy who bought the book, it's got over 5,000 rhythms in it. They get very complicated, but it starts out pretty easy, and it's got some really good advice right at the very beginning about just simple things to do if you're a beginning drummer. I love it. I haven't made it very far in it yet, but I've been going through it, and I think you started simple, and I've kind of flipped to the back and kind of looked and went, oh no, I don't even understand what I'm looking at yet, but I figure by the time I get there, I will.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an encyclopedia of rhythm that can be applied to any instrument, period. It's not just a drum book, because it's all just one line of rhythm. Each one of the rhythms is one line of rhythm. You can apply it to anything. Any instrument. You can start to revoice it. You can use the rests as information to fill in. Like I go in the introduction of the book, I go into all these different ways that you can interpret the material, and that's one of the reasons that I wanted to do this as well, to create this encyclopedia and this archive, was to essentially make a book that could be almost endless with what you could do with it. Initially, just for my own, selfish reasons, essentially. But then I was like, well, my God, people could start to use this. And, the first 238 rhythms of the book, which is all the groupings in 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, are written in a binary fashion. It's either a note or a rest. You either play or you don't. But you don't even have to know about reading music. You just have to know, this means play, this means don't. Yep. That's it. It's binary, right? So you could be a completely non-musician and very quickly count any rhythm in 7 and 5 and 6, and then if you wanted to start tinkering on, a piano or a drum set or a trumpet or with a couple spoons or on your body or some newspapers, whatever you got, right, to make sound or noise with, you can start taking those rhythms and just applying them to anything. It is a truly universal encyclopedia of rhythm, and from all the research I've done, which has been pretty exhaustive, between myself, some friends, and a lawyer of mine. It's unique, in the true sense of the word unique. It is truly unique that there's no other book like it in existence.
You can get that at BlakeTheDrummer.com. You also have a YouTube channel. You can search for Blake Fleming on YouTube. You're doing online lessons as well, right?
That's right. Yeah, I've been teaching people all over the world via online platforms like FaceTime or Skype or whatever people have available, Facebook. I've been doing that for about 6 years now, and it was just a great way for me to expand the pool of potential people that I could pull into my studio, as a means of income, again, because I've always enjoyed teaching. I've been teaching, for 3/4 of my life. And if the whole world becomes the pool, it's like, well, I imagine I can get some people out of there. And over time, people have begun to know me more and more in different parts of the world through bands and, through my book or through various things. And so, I've literally taught people all over the world. I might teach somebody in Italy, in the morning for me because it's later over there, and then in the afternoon, I might be teaching somebody in the morning in California. I always have to, make sure that we, just like we did this interview, I had to check the time zone. I'm very used to doing that because I teach, like I said, people from all over the place. I probably taught people in, 15 or 16 different countries. And my book, to bring that around to you, my book has been sold in 17 different countries now. And I printed 500 initially, and there's about 70 left or so. So we're almost through that first printing. It's 240 pages. It is built like a freaking tank. You can smash that thing Like my work copy, I open up, it's completely flat. I've smashed it down. Like the spine is ultra strong. In fact, I paid extra to get basically one of the strongest spines that they make right now. It's with it's called a PUR perfect spine, and the PUR is some sort of special kind of glue that essentially kind of like rubberizes and is like super flexible but super strong. There was only a couple places in the U.S. that worked with it for some reason, and I had a local printer of mine kind of be the middleman between me and the offset printer who did the book because he could speak their language. The books actually got printed. I can't remember the name of the printing company. They got printed in St. Louis, I believe. Actually, it's printed in the USA, which is pretty rare for a lot of books nowadays. A lot of books are definitely printed overseas. Like many things are farmed out overseas because it's cheaper. But this is printed in the USA also, and you're supporting an independent artist, and you'll be getting something that until I made it was never in existence. I basically corralled all this information that was in the universe, but no one had ever corralled it and organized it, And not only did I do that, but then I show you all these ways that you can apply it, And you can be the most advanced musician in the world and get something out of this, and you can be a little kid brand new to music. And as long as you can count to 3, you can start in this book.
I love it that you built it so solid because, if you're sitting behind the drum set and you're looking at the book and then you decide, I'm going to try this, what do? You toss it down on the ground. That thing's got to hold up all those tosses.
That's right.
That's a real musician thinking right there.
Yes, absolutely. It was ultra important to me that the book be physically of the utmost quality because of me putting this out myself independently. And even though I have a bit of a name and a bit of a reputation, a little bit, in certain circles, I have to make sure that I am taken seriously. Just because it's not coming from Mel Bay or Hudson Music or one of the big, music manufacturers, the reason I didn't go through any of those routes, I checked into those just to see if it was even an option, and essentially they were just going to take all my money. So it was no option. They were going to take. It was basically like, okay, we'll take that, thank you. And it's like, no, that's not, no. So for me, I knew that if I published this myself, it might be a bit more of a slow burn to get the word out, but eventually the word would get out. And the thing about the Book of Rhythm is that it's a reference book, meaning that the information in it is timeless. It's not trendy. This is never going to go away. This is a book that can sell in perpetuity. It can sell forever because it is information that is there, that has never been organized and held. That volume there, and it's timeless information in that way. It's because it's reference material,
Yeah.
So that was another reason why I pursued doing it, because trust me, it was a crazy endeavor. My wife at one point thought I'd really started to lose my mind at one point, and maybe I kind of was at some point, but I kind of had to go through that in order to come out on the other side, as they say, right? I had to break on through, my brothers.
Well, thanks a lot, Professor Blake Fleming, for joining us this evening and giving us a little drum lesson. And
that is ironic. I am a professor, but I actually dropped out of college, just to say. More irony in my life and career.
Yeah, I had to bring that up, didn't I?
Not only is he, look, a professor, one of Spin Magazine's top 100 alternative drummers, and just a hell of a nice guy.
Yeah.
And a fun guy to party with if you ever get the chance.
Check out the website, BlakeTheDrummer.com. Also, the YouTube channel, just search for Blake Fleming. You're also on Twitter. That's Blake Flem Drum on Twitter.
Yeah,
and
mainly do Facebook and Instagram. I started a Twitter account, but man, it's too much. I get pulled in too many directions. But so you'll find me somewhere though.
Yeah, easy to find, and Wikipedia as well. So there you go. Appreciate it, Blake Fleming, for joining us, and that does it, Pigpen, for another edition of Riverbend Talent.
Thanks so much, you guys. Appreciate it.
Right on. Everybody get out and support local music and art as soon as they let us.
All right.